Good morning, Dr. Oren. Welcome. You're in the United States. Who did you bring with you this time?
I had an extraordinary week, Hugh. For the first time ever, we brought a delegation of residents of the northern part of Israel, people who have been without a home for 8 months now, living under now almost constant rocket fire. Their kids not in school, their livelihoods destroyed, crops left to rot on the vine, literally to rot on the vine, and nobody knows about it. It's not being covered in the American media. And we went to Washington. I'm here in Washington. We went to the Hill for several days. We met with American policymakers. We were in the White House yesterday to raise awareness that this situation is utterly intolerable and that the people of Israel, the government of Israel, cannot wait much longer.
I'm surprised to hear you're in the White House, Dr. Oren, for this simple reason. There are some anti-Israel people in the White House staff, and they're pulling on the president and Jake Sullivan one way. Your delegation has been here with Manhattan anti-Semitism on full display in the subways and outside the Nova exhibition in Manhattan with the pro-Hamas demonstrators in Lafayette Park. Are your Israeli friends shocked? You wouldn't be, but are they shocked?
They were shocked. The day I arrived here, there was a huge demonstration outside the White House with demonstrators calling on Hezbollah to kill more Israeli soldiers, Hamas to kill more Israeli soldiers. In front of the White House, you don't have to go to New York. We're talking about thousands of people who are bussed in with the standard Palestinian flags, including one that was the size of a baseball field. Who's paying for all this? Who's organizing all this in front of the White House? And who's flying flags of organizations that are terrorist organizations and recognized as such by the U.S. government? To me, violation of federal law. But, what do I know? I'm not a citizen of this country. Right?
I got to ask you, because some Israelis, I assume, were here for the first time. And did they have any idea of the depth and breadth of the anti-Semitism, which has now broken out in public in America, and the pro-Hamas militants who are allowed to mask their face and threaten people on New York City subway? Mm-hmm. And I doubt your delegation walked over to Lafayette Park to try and make peace with these people.
No, you can't. This is not an educational moment. But, I think they also got a sense from many of the people we met, and I must say here on both sides of the aisle, that the American people are not there at all. Last night, strange enough, I went to a congressional baseball game, an American moment not to be missed. And pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas demonstrators broke onto the field. First of all, they screamed and shouted throughout the Star-Spangled Banner, something you don't do. But then they broke out into the field and they were arrested by the police, and the entire stadium broke out in a chant of USA, USA.
That is encouraging, because that's both Republicans and Democrats. That's usually congressional staffers, their families and friends come to that game. And I saw that clip. I'm glad. Did you take any of your delegation with you?
No, they had just gone. I went alone, but it was quite a moment.
So, Doctor, we've got house guests.
It's a source of hope.
I want to get back to their mission. We have house guests come and go up in the summer. We freeload on our brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we freeload on our freeloaders, and we love that. But they don't want to stay here 8 months. Nobody wants to stay in a hotel or somebody's house for 8 months. What are these folks doing who have been displaced from the north? And by the north, I think we mean at least 6 miles from the border, which is thousands and thousands of Israelis.
It's 60,000 Israelis, to be exact, are homeless. 80,000 are under fire. And the fire is creeping southward every day. Now it's hitting around Nazareth, Tiberias, the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. And Hezbollah, they know our weak point. Our weak point is a war of attrition. Can't win. And our weak point is a war that doesn't have a full trigger. And one of the issues I'm breaking up in Washington is, okay, what's the trigger? Is it one rocket on Haifa? Is it 2 rockets on Haifa? At what point can Israel convince American policymakers that we've gone more than the extra mile and that no country on earth would tolerate this type of outrageous aggression? We have to defend ourselves. Now, how we defend ourselves is going to be another issue. Because as you know, there's a question of ammunition in the world, and Hezbollah is a strategic threat. Hamas was merely a tactical threat. It's a completely different war.
Well, your friend,
I'm trying to clarify here.
Your friend Haviv was on Monday. You're on today. Haviv said, look, we're going to have to do this. It's going to be fast and it's going to be overwhelming. Do you agree with Haviv?
Yes. Totally. Different war. Why? Because the IDF estimate for rocket fire per day from Lebanon would be between 2,000 and 6,000 rockets a day. These are longer range rockets. They're heavier rockets. They are very accurate rockets. People can't walk around the streets in these abandoned cities. Hezbollah will pick you off. They're that accurate. And our air bases will be targeted, our oil refineries, Dimona, everything will be targeted. We are not going to be able to wait an hour, much less weeks. And it cannot be done just from the air. It cannot.
If you can stand by for 1 second, Dr. Oren, I have one question to ask you about the, quote,
please,
reformist candidate for Iranian presidency, because there are no reformers in Iran. In the Financial Times this morning, I think it's the best newspaper in the world, there's a story about the reformist candidate who's got momentum in Iran. He's been allowed to run, former health minister. He's a doctor. He's a surgeon. He's a reformer. And I have been there are no real elections in Iran. Do you want to add to my tirade about this coverage?
Yeah, there's no real reformer. I mean, that's one of the families that were holding our hostages that were released in Gaza. He was a doctor, too. A lot of people are doctors in the Middle East. That doesn't make them any more moderate. I think that in Iran, it's not really a question of moderation versus radicalism. It's a matter of what face you show to the West and how much you can get away with it. And, during the period of the moderate Iranian government, they got the JCPOA, which is the best deal that Iran could have gotten. And so it's just a different face on the exact same regime. And that regime is the world's largest state supporter of terror. It's a Holocaust denier. It's trying to destroy the Jewish state on a daily basis. Okay, so someone's going to put, going to put lipstick on that. But it's not going to change the nature of it.
No, it's like a student council election in a high school. It doesn't really do anything in a high school. Let me close by asking you this, Dr. Oren. I'm pretty pessimistic this morning because Ukraine's in a war. Israel's in a hot war. The Houthis have screwed up shipping. China's getting ready to take Taiwan, and there's evidence of that. Admiral Paparo was out giving interviews to try and alert people to that. I feel like it's 1940 to 1941. The United States really isn't in the fight. We're doing stuff to help Israel. We're doing stuff to help Ukraine. But we really don't want any part of this whole thing. And we've got people running our side of the war who aren't really committed to winning. What do you think of that analogy?
I think that it's the biggest challenge we face, and I face here in Washington. And I want to stress, I'm not in any position here. I'm not, a plenipotentiary in any way. I'm not in government. I'm not an ambassador. I'm just a citizen who cares. Is that the United States has to let us win. And what we have is, a lot of restraints on us, whether it's in the South or in the North. And ultimately, Israel will have to act to preserve its existence, its sovereignty, its security. Of course, we'll have to do that. It would be much, much better if the United States was in back of us and not in front of us.
And last question, there are harrowing details about the hostages this morning and the absolute torture they were put through, the psychological brainwashing that occurred. It's horrific. Does Israel want to go and get as many as they can through the use of force, meaning all out? Let's just go in and crush Hamas and grab as many as we can? Or are they going to play this stupid game that the American administration has insisted on, quote, negotiating with Hamas after they've said no about 1,000 times?
No, Israel's going to try to get any hostages by any means. And then the opportunity, should they arise. Remember, this operation took weeks to plan. It wasn't done overnight. What we're dealing with, like the front page a headline of the Washington Post yesterday, was, again, emphasizing the number of civilians killed during this rescue operation. A single civilian needn't have been killed if the civilians hadn't opened fire on our commandos who were trying to extricate those released hostages. The commandos would have just gone in and got them out. But the people holding the hostages were quote-unquote civilians. Hamas had given guns to hundreds of quote-unquote civilians in this area. This whole notion, the breakdown of civilian to terrorists, is in Gaza almost completely irrelevant, Hugh. Almost completely irrelevant. And yet we're going to keep on getting condemned. If that's the price of freeing our hostages, and I will tell you this, as a citizen, unequivocally release them.
And I think that's majority opinion in the United States. Certainly my opinion. Last aside, Politico has a story. I don't know if you want to read this because you might stroke out. Headline: Biden's Israel policy may hasten Trump's rise, U.S. allies fear. First line: Biden and his aides have largely defended the Israeli offensive against Hamas militants in Gaza. That's Politico this morning, and that's a lie. They have not largely defended Israel's offensive in Gaza. They have largely impeded it. Now, you're not in the government. Do you agree with me or do you agree with Politico?
I think I'm going to sound like a typical diplomat. You're both right, and that the administration's position has been twofold. On one hand, to give us a certain degree of support, and the other hand, to hold us back. And it sometimes it can drive you crazy because we get criticism in Washington for going too slow in Rafah, and yet if we go too fast, we get criticized for going too fast and jeopardizing civilian lives. So there are two different messages that come out all the time, and frequently it is extremely difficult to reconcile the two.